Hey students, this is a video explaining our space assignment for the elements of art. So we've finally made it to the very last element of art. So there are 7 elements of art, and the last and most complicated is space. So this is what we're going to focus on this week, and it'll be our last assignment for art class. And there's one last thing, which is just a written reflection, and that is under assignments in Canvas. It's basically like a survey or like a quiz on Canvas, and there's just 3 questions, and that is due on the very last day of school. So make sure after you complete all of your elements of art assignments that you go in and fill that out, and that's also for part of your grade for this whole unit. So space. We are going to be focusing on space as the illusion of depth on a 2-dimensional surface, because we are not creating a 3-dimensional work of art. We're not working with actual space, and so we need to create the sense of depth and space in a drawing, which is on the 2-dimensional surface. So you should have your paper set up similar to this. You can see that I've written the definition of space at the top of my page. You could include this exact same definition, or if you have something kind of similar with the definition and any other additional notes that you took from the video. But again, it doesn't have to be too much. Just make sure you put something down that space is the illusion of depth in a work of art, in a 2-dimensional work of art. So on the assignment page, right underneath this video, you will see this handout here. So this handout explains 6 different ways to create this illusion of depth on a 2-dimensional surface. So some of these are going to sound really familiar to you because we've already talked about ways to create depth in this class. Like you might remember overlapping as one of our tips for good composition. And we learned that when you place one thing in front of another, it automatically creates a sense of depth and distance between those 2 objects. So overlapping is our simplest, easiest way to create the illusion of depth in a drawing. So you are going to be picking 2 different ways of creating depth. I want you to have at least 2 in your drawing. And you can pick whichever ones you want, but they should be there should be at least 2 of them in there, and I actually challenge those of you who want to challenge yourself a little bit, maybe try to incorporate all of them or most of them in your artwork, because that can make things be really interesting and definitely look a little bit more realistic. So let's go through each of these. So we talked about overlapping, again, one thing in front of the other. Now you are not going to be just doing shapes. This handout is here to just show you that, like, here, random things can be placed in this way to create depth, but you are going to be creating actual objects. So you're not going to be drawing triangles and hexagons and squares and circles and things like that. You need to come up with some idea. You can draw people, you can draw animals, you can draw trees and buildings, whatever you want to draw, do something there. But make sure you're not just copying what is on this handout, okay? That's really important. I want you to apply your own ideas and creativity to this, so don't just take this as what you're supposed to draw. So you can also do shading. So we learned about how adding value to a work of art creates form. Well, form and space are very interconnected, because for both of them, we're talking about depth, right? Form is a 3-dimensional object. Space is about creating this illusion of 3 dimensions. So when we're creating a form on a 2-dimensional surface, when we're creating that illusion of a 3-dimensional object, then we automatically have the sense of space and depth. So one way to do that is to create a form in your in this drawing that also creates space. Now, you can't just do that, right? Because we're talking about more than just form for this. So you could do that one in addition to some of these other things. Placements, the place where you put things in your artwork show space and depth. So you can tell on each of these little drawings here, they all have a horizon line. So when I do demonstration drawing for you here in a second, the first thing you need to do is include a horizon line. That's really important. We're going to talk about why when I draw it out. So here for placement, we can see that the objects that are closer to the bottom of the page appear closer to us. So the lower down they have, this is like the foreground section. We think about our artwork as split into 3 sections. So we could say foreground is at the bottom, midground in the middle, and then our background is at the top. And that's where the sky goes, right? So our horizon line divides the sky and the earth, which is why it's really important to have it so we can get a sense of where the sky is in relation to the ground. And everything closer to the bottom of the page is what's going to come forward and be part of our foreground. So that's what we understand when we look at our placement. Now, you can see that these 2 squares here, this one appears closer to us because it's closer to the bottom of the page, and this one appears farther away, but they are the exact same size, and that makes it seem like this one in the foreground is actually really small, and this one in the background is actually really large because of this appearing closer to us. So when we go to the second panel over here, this is our 4th way of creating this illusion of space. If we combine these 2, this is the most effective way to do this, where we have things larger closer to the bottom, and then things get smaller and smaller as they get farther away. So you can create that sense of depth by just having placement and having these things be the same size, but it's going to be way more effective to also make those things in the foreground larger, because things that are closer to us appear larger, and then as they get farther and farther away, they get smaller and smaller as they appear farther away. So if now we're looking at these circles, and we can kind of think of these circles as probably being around similar in size, right? But because this one is so much closer to us, it appears bigger, and we can think of that circle is so far away, but it's still probably pretty large in size if we were to walk through this path and actually stand up close to it, right? It might be similar size to this one in the foreground. So this is another really simple way of creating a sense of depth, is literally just changing the size of things so that we've got things in the foreground that are larger, and then they get smaller and smaller as they get closer to the horizon line and higher up on the page. And then we can also do, these all kind of lead one into the other. So linear perspective is like a road going off into the distance, or in this case we have these shapes placed between lines that converge on a single vanishing point. So a really easy way to think about this is like a road or a path. You can do that in terms of it going straight, or it could be winding. So for example, if we have a winding path going back, and it gets narrower and narrower as it gets closer to this vanishing point. Or we could also think about this as just, a straight road that could go back, but it converges on a vanishing point off in the distance, and that creates linear perspective. But we could also place things in a way that is linear perspective. You might remember from Mr. Burton's class when you did those 3D words, you were learning about linear perspective, and all of the parts of the words that were going back converged on a single vanishing point. So that's the same idea. It's just that in this concept we have a horizon line, and we were talking about creating some sort of landscape or something where we have the sky and then the horizon line that divides the sky and the earth, and then we have things moving back in a linear perspective way. And then the last one here is atmospheric perspective. So this is the idea that things that are closer to us appear darker. They are darker in value and more detailed. And then as things get farther and farther away, they become lighter and lighter and less detailed. So with that concept, you could do layering of hills and mountains layering, and you can make them lighter and lighter as they go higher up and farther away. And you can really get that sense that these things are getting back and receding and getting farther and farther away. So then we create that sense of depth. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at our paper here. So as you can see, I've got the definition at the top, and I'm actually going to draw sort of the edges of my drawing here in like a box. So this way I can sort of keep everything in my drawing within this area, and I don't have to worry too much about it being too big, or you don't have to use the entire page. But for this drawing, I do want you to try to make it a more finished drawing than some of your other elements of art. So if you are using pencil, you want to not just have it in pencil line, you can go over it in pen, or you can add that shading to make things look a little bit more realistic and more detailed. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the horizon line. So your first step with doing this drawing is adding a horizon line. So now we can really clearly see that there's a sky and there's an earth. Now the horizon line does not have to just be a straight line. You could, if you wanted to, add a more like varied line, like maybe you have some mountains, maybe it's kind of varied mountains instead of just peaks. Maybe it's more hill-like, right? Now there's another horizon line. This horizon line is helpful because this is what we can use to create linear perspective and have that vanishing point. So I'm just going to start by showing you how to do a road really quickly with linear perspective, and of course with all of these, you are creating your own drawing. So don't just copy what you're seeing here, make it your own version, do it however you want. Just make sure that you are showing at least 2 different ways of creating space and depth. So here I've given myself a vanishing point, and I'm going to go ahead and draw 2 lines that come out from that vanishing point. So one line going here, and then another line here. So now we can start to see that maybe this starts to become a road. And if I was to add sort of these dashed lines for the middle of the road, they would start getting shorter and shorter as they get farther away. Now you can start to see that this road is receding, it's going back, it's going away from us. We create that illusion of depth. And remember that this first part, this part here is the foreground. This becomes then the midground. And then this is the background, everything that's farthest away. Okay, so now we can start thinking about what kinds of things we could place in the foreground, midground, and background, and which of these different ways of creating space that we might want to use. So again, you are not just adding the shapes from that handout, you're going to add different things, like maybe you might add house or a tree or people, lots of different ways. Again, I'm not going to draw this for you. I just wanted to show you the perspective version here and the horizon line, and then everything you add into here, you can do overlapping, you can show atmospheric perspective with like colored pencils or pencil where you're shading it in, things darker in the foreground and things getting lighter and lighter as they get farther away. You can show that placement, so placing things as they get smaller and smaller as they get closer to this horizon line. And a linear perspective, lots of different ways to do this. So pick at least 2 different ways of creating space. And again, you're going to complete this a little bit more than just pencil line. So I highly suggest, if you have markers, colored pencils, pen, go over things in pen, erase the pencil, color things, make it look really nice and complete. I really want to see a finished, complete drawing with this. And I also want you to write down at the bottom here the 2 different things that you use. So maybe you might write like linear perspective and overlapping. So write down whichever 2 different ways of creating space that you use along the bottom here or along the side, totally up to you. All right, everyone, happy drawing. Have fun with your final project for this year and for 6th grade art class. I really look forward to seeing all of your work. All right, bye.